Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our, African Community Together in conjunction with TakeRoot Justice, our report release and briefing on the African Hair Braiders, Vision for Reforming Professional Licensure in New York City.
Good morning and welcome to this briefing on licensing a legacy, the vision of African hair braiders for reforming their industry in New York. African hair braiders are in many ways at the heart of the African community in New York City, and they have been central to ACT's work since we first began. In fact, if you look at our logo that you see on the slide, it is modeled after a braid, which is a symbol both of African cultural legacy and of unity of different strands coming together. This project is the largest survey that we know of to ask African hair braiders about their opinions about what needs to change in their industry so that they can earn a dignified living in safety and health, particularly post-COVID.
We partnered with African communities together on this project, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. It's such important work, and this is what you're going to see today is the culmination of a lot of hard work from everyone at African Communities Together and all the hair braiders that were involved.
So the natural hair styling license is required for any professional hair braiders and other hair styling professionals who perform services such as arranging, dressing, twisting, weaving, extending, or locking the hair. So while different from a cosmetology license, the process still has numerous requirements, which our research shows are prohibitively burdensome for African hair braiders. So the requirements for obtaining the license include physical examination by a physical or a nurse, a social security number or a federal ID number, or a written explanation of why this cannot be provided, 300 hours of approved course of study and written and practical exams, or to document equivalent education outside of New York State, or to document 5 years of professional experience in an equivalent occupation. To document experience outside of the US, the hair braider needs to provide a certificate of licensure or a letter from a consulate certifying licensure is not required in their country, detailed letters from clients and employers, and a copy of passport and tax returns indicating natural hair styling as a profession, as an occupation.
Assalamu alaikum. maa ngi dëkk Sénégal maa ngi jàngale Sénégal depuis boobu léegi am na 10 ans maa ngi ci lett bi waaw bi ma fi ñëwee ba léegi maa ngi ci lett bi laa nekk te dañuy am ay jafe-jafe ci biir liggéey bi te itam ñàkk licence bi tamit joué na ci rôle bu baax da ngay am customer yi nga xamante ni dañ lay sonal ci sa biir liggéey dañuy ñëw des fois nga tasa seeg ñu baax des fois nga tasa seeg ñi nga xamante ni ñu ngi noonu daal ba nga xamante ni licence bi tax na ñu soxla ko loolu tax na ñu soxla licence bi ndax jafe-jafe yi si am léeg-léeg client day ñëw nga lett ka ba ca digg ba du bëgg fay daal di lay créer ay problème ak ay histoire ak yooyu bëgg dem te du fay ak yooyu ngay woo police des fois police day ñëw du ci régler dara loo xamante ni dina la satisfaire daal ba tax na yooyu yëpp daf ciy jouer waaw
ye problème min sɔrɔ n kɛtɔ ka kundigi papier ɲini problème fɔlɔ u ye wari min fɔ a ka ca a cayara ma filanan kɛra min ye u ye temps min fɔ o temps kɔnɔna na ne tɛ se ka taga ekɔli la ka tila ka segin ko min na baara kɛ a temps tɛ a tun tɛ a tɛ n permettre ka kɛ so wari min fɔra fɛnɛ o wari ka ca parce que an nana wari ɲini na yan nɔ so wari tɛ ka sɔrɔ parce que an bɛ minnu kundigi américain u ma valeur y'an ka baara la parce que u b'an bolola fɛnw de mais u t'an ka baara valeur d'an ma quoi.
nako na akila yake miko so kumi jamana sikitu ya parce que papier li ko be ya bon ni ala muso chaman ko papier kake que no debe ko no ya bolo na fana ka ala ni odi quoi ya parce que ya no ni ara itara mo ka sor kono ibe papier de ni nga diplôme yes bon be ni no ni diplôme table bon ni diplôme de mi bulu tekleni o de la muso ko papier ka dan fana ma ni sama nana bukado kan fana be kunene de jamana ko
dafa nekk li nga xamanteni daf ñuy dooleel daf ñuy fital te daf ñuy gëmloo li ñuy liggéey que ni suñu métier la mën nañ ko te suñu profession la amuñu ci dara loo xamante ni ragal nañ ko ci looloo tax ñu bëgg ñu am suñu licence bopp ba nga xamante ni ëllëg ak si biir bu ñu bëggee financement wala aide wala ku ñu jàppale ñu am suñu business bopp yëpp loolu tax na ñu bëgg suñu licence bopp te itam pour ñu yombalal ñu ko ba nga xamante ni daan ko mën a am ci anam bu yomb daal par rapport ak li ñu ci ma daan dégg si nit ñi ñuy wax ne licence bi dafa cher te ma bëggoon naa ko trop mais ñàkk moyen ak liñ ci war a fay jafe na jafe goo xamante ni mënuma ko woon am léegi nag bi ma duggee ci association bi ba nu wax ci affaire licence bi que ni daan si jàppale pour ñu mën ko am nu mu yombe moo tax man dugg ci sonn ci pour ñu yombalal nu ko ba nga xamante ni du man rek waaye man ak ñeneen ak samay moroom yi si nekk ñu mën ko am nu mu gën a yomb anam bu yomb daal ba nga xamante ni daanu mën a continuer suñu liggéey li mu ci bëgg mooy ñu obtenir licence bi mooy li nga xamante ni moo ñuy dimbale ci suñu liggéey loolu daal bëgg nañ ko nga xamante ni bu liggéey bi jeexee ñu am suñu licence ku nekk mën a libre si sa liggéey mën a am crédibilité mën a am gëm ci li ngay liggéey am professionnalisme ak yooyu
ku yɛrɛ de b'a lajɛ sisan nɔ o bɛ nɔgɔya cogo min na parce que dɔw bɛ yen ni nɔ niveau d'étude t'u la bon dɔw bɛ yen ni nɔ u étudiera mais a ma taga yɔrɔ jan dɔw bɛ yen ni nɔ olu fɛnɛ kalanlen don mais komi n y'a fɔ cogo min na baara in de ka nɔgɔ an ma parce que papier t'an caman bolo k'a fɔ k'an bɛ taga ka taga américain baara kɛ n'o bɔra yen ni nɔ de fait que afiriki kuntigi an t'a sara an t'a fɔ i bɛ dege a la yen ni nɔ sokɔnɔna na ka fɛngɛ kɛ wa ne de ka nɔgɔ an ma baara la quoi.
To the entire West African community of Uptown Manhattan, I want to thank you for being such a strong force for economic development, for bringing us together as a stronger community and enriching Uptown Manhattan and New York City in so many ways. What the entrepreneurs who are working in hairstyling have done is incredible. You have created economic vitality, you have created employment, and you're also providing a wonderful and much needed service. So thank you. I celebrate you and support you. And you should have fewer barriers in getting the licensing that you need.
So we collected around 346 surveys of African hair braiders working out of salons in New York City. We collected our surveys at 103 salon locations, and the surveys were administered in French, English, Mandingo, and Wolof. We ran 3 focus group meetings with 18 hair braiders total, and interpretation was provided during those focus group meetings in French, English, Mandingo, and Wolof. We also did profile interviews that you can find throughout the report, where we selected hair braider leaders and asked them to give us a details about their experience as hair braiders and any challenges that they faced. And we conducted, with the help of TakeRoot Justice, background and policy research to examine existing literature and understand how natural hairstyling is regulated in New York City and elsewhere.
African hair braiders are a workforce of immigrant women of color. I believe all but one of our survey respondents identified as women, all identified as Black and or African, and almost all were born outside the US. And then we really want to emphasize that braiding is a long-term career for folks. So nearly 2/3 of the braiders that we surveyed had been working as a braider for 10 or more years. And almost all of them, just about 9 out of 10, reported that braiding was their only occupation. And almost 2/3 of braiders learned how to braid while growing up. Virtually everyone we surveyed did not have a license. So 93% of braiders did not have a license. And of them, almost all, 97%, wanted the license. 42% of braiders didn't know there was a license, and an additional quarter knew there was a license but didn't know how to get it. So about 90% of hair braiders said that at least one of the steps required to obtain a license would pose a barrier to them. And so a major one were the time and cost barriers posed by the education requirements. So that's both the challenge of completing the 300 hours of educational requirements and the money it costs to pay for that training. About 80% of respondents said that it would be difficult to understand both written information in English or someone talking about the license in English, but also barriers posed by literacy as well. So 1/3 of the braiders we surveyed had no formal education, and an additional quarter had education through elementary or primary school. So reading and writing in their home languages also posed a barrier. We also heard from braiders concerns about explaining their immigration status. And 40% of braiders said that having to explain their immigration status would be a barrier to them. And then, just a final note on the application process. As Maimuna mentioned, there is, in theory, essentially, an option to get a waiver if you've been a career braider instead of these 300 hours of study. But the way that that works makes this completely out of reach for the African hair braiders we spoke to and that ACT knows well. Most braiders worked extensively and have really deep knowledge, but in informal settings. So doing things like getting detailed employer letters of recommendation really isn't feasible. And then, there's this requirement to have your embassy testify that a license isn't required to braid hair in your home country. And I've heard from, the organizers at ACT that when they describe to that braider, usually people laugh at the idea that they would be able to get that kind of documentation from their embassy. So this really isn't a kind of accessible or functional part of the process for braiders. I'll just close by giving you a sense of kind of what this experience felt like to the braiders we talked to. So braiders feel the pressure of being unlicensed. At least a quarter of them have been asked, a quarter of them have been asked to show a license by at least one person. And an additional 70% had at least one, and most people more, concerns about the fact that they didn't have a license. And so this ranged from things like being concerned that a customer would refuse to pay them or would report them knowing that they were unlicensed and had limited recourse, or that a braider couldn't report an issue with a customer because it would disclose that she wasn't licensed. And you heard some of this in the testimony that we heard thus far, and you'll hear a little more in closing. And then finally, and I know you heard this in the testimony video as well, I just want to emphasize that, the braiders we spoke to want the license. They want the professional, kind of the marker of the professionalism of their career. They want everything that the license confers. They want the recognition and the rights, but they want it to be easier to get a license. So 90% of respondents thought it should be easier to get, and about 2/3 wanted more support for people trying to get a license. And that's really, for us was the jumping off point for crafting the policy recommendations with the braiders.
While this research was conducted prior to COVID-19, during the pandemic, our findings became even more salient. During New York State on pause, hair braiders could no longer work because all the salons were mandated to close. And ACT was in touch with hundreds of hair braiders who we assisted with navigating unemployment and pandemic assistance relief programs, small business counseling, and other emergency assistance. And through that, we found that a lot of braiders were facing numerous challenges in navigating this professional and personal crisis, in trying to access supports and benefits and living with anxiety about the future of their profession. So as New York City navigates reopening amid great uncertainty, removing barriers to work is more important than ever. So this represents an opportune time to implement reforms that will allow braiders to achieve professional licensure, which will allow them to work, as Erin was mentioning in some of the quotes, a lot of braiders want to feel secure in their job. They want to have that professional security and dignity. So one of the recommendations is that we want to improve access to information about licensure. When we did the survey, we noticed a lot of the braiders didn't even know that the license existed. So we want the Department of State to ensure that braiders know that the license exists, that they have in-person access to information about the licensing process. And for that, we want them to designate physical space that braiders can visit, which will be staffed by people who speak the languages that most of the braiders speak, and to also add multilingual written guidance and videos to the state website. We also want the Department of State to reduce and revise the course and examination requirements for licensure and require only health and safety curriculum for experienced braiders. So as you noticed, when I was discussing the requirements to get a hair braider license, you notice that braiders were required to complete 300 hours of course study. So we want that to be eliminated. And then instead, we want for experienced braiders to only have to do 20 hours of health and safety training, where they're not going to be taught how to braid because they already know how to do so, but then they are going to be taught something around health and safety that will help them in their job. And for those who are new to braiding, we want the state to only require 80 hours of study, which the 20 hours of health and safety information will be included. And we want them to eliminate the requirement for written and practical examinations because, as Erin mentioned, during the research findings, a lot of the braiders could not read and write. So making them take an exam, a written exam in English is just difficult for them, would be difficult for them. So instead, we require that a certificate of course completion is sent to the Department of State to obtain the license. And we got this idea from the security guard licensing, where people after the training, they'll get a certificate that they can take with a money order and send it to the Department of Licensing in order for them to get their license. The other recommendation is we want to streamline the process that required experienced braiders to document prior experience. So this is about the waiver. So instead of asking them to get a consulate letter from to get a letter from their consulate and copies of their passport and tax returns, we want that to be eliminated because it's going to be a problem for braiders to obtain. So instead, we want them to make hair braiders to just furnish 2 letters of recommendation from prior clients. And we want the state to create available templates of recommendation where the clients of the hair braiders can just check off where they have received the services and then the amount of time and the location. The other recommendation is we want the state to build the license application process into the course of study. So to require that course providers furnish a certificate at the end of the program. This is what I just mentioned earlier, instead of requiring them to do the course study. One of the other recommendations we thought it was very important was for the state to allow for the use of the New York City Municipal ID card, because as we mentioned, a lot of the hair braiders were undocumented. So asking them to provide a social security number would cause problem, or a federal ID number. So instead, they can just use their New York City Municipal ID number as a form of identification. We want also the state to appoint natural hair stylists to the vacant seat on the Appearance Enhancement Advisory Committee. During our research, we noticed that those seats were vacant, and instead, now we're asking the state to appoint a hair braider or a natural hairstylist who can understand the needs and struggles that the hair braiders are going through, so they can advocate better for them. We also want, one of the main issues we found throughout our survey collection and also the focus group meetings that we had, was a lot of the braiders complained about an issue where customers will refuse to pay them as a hair braider once they complete their work. So we want to convene to solve that problem. We want to convene a task force on theft of services where there will be hair braiders and representatives from the Department of State who, whenever there is an issue in that area, they can come and find solution.
And just reading through it and going through it and listening to the testimonies again it just further underscores the reason why we have to continue to advocate and to amplify the voices of the hundreds of Black women who are in the hair profession as natural hairstylists, and how we need to break down these structural barriers to them receiving earnings and participating and being able to support their families. Whether it's, advancing and expanding the examinations for, and increasing like access to people with limited English proficiency, or even just like was said in the recommendations, focusing the entry on health and safety and not necessarily validating whether or not someone has a skill set that they have learned and that has been passed on for generations and generations. Like that is the epitome of white supremacy. So we really do stand with this community, and we are looking forward to working with you as you advocate for and demand and make your issues known to the State Department and the Secretary of State and the governor. And let's see how we can work together.
But me wanting be any no never feel a for man munya na never feel we have for chumu uka no yama kwa kamera uka no yama paske ame bala mina ama go be fen kele mina mo ko chama be ni no umakala meni bara yeni e ba se ga soro eri taji paske so kono nana itaga soro mo ko te boga ta ka wara go ka kundigi be be nyogo kundigi so kono nana kadi chugo mina. So ibe wele ga sori ga sokono na ni na dugula dugumi ibe se ga ki ga barai. Moi je pense que aucun no ima iga taga do aduguto mo system na barako ta fankalala. So no sera ga to anga sega anga barake a chogola ni uga papier da ama. Wala sa me sega sigini certitude e ka fame bara mina problem tama foi. Bo mo no anga kunigila o fena nebe mi fena ni no fe nunu be ka bara mi fo parce dugu be na sariare do fena obe ni no peut-être anta do abara kono nana mais ni anta gara kataga nyenyi ni te dore kataga akalandoni abena nogoya parce que mogo ibena ta keme ibitaga soro bi kono tombe no déjà obe abe fait min gala bado mais ni papier te ni no ama nogo quoi so no koni papier ndama akada nyi nogoya kono na ora bena fe gafo bo mogo no anga kundigila ofena nebe mi fena nyino fe nunu be ka bara mi fo parce que dugu bena sariare do fena obe ni no peut-être anta do abara kono na mais ni antagara kataga nyeni te dore kataga akalandoni abena nogoya parce que mogo ibena anta keme ibitaga soro bi kono tombe no déjà obe abe fait min gala bado mais ni papier te ni no ama nogo quoi so no koni papier ndama akada nyi nogoya kono na ora bena fe gafo.
So it looks like we have a couple of questions regarding enforcement. Is enforcement happening? Are braiders getting ticketed? Do we know anyone who's had issues with being shut down?
So this enforcing is done by the state, so the Department of Licensing. And so we have braiders who got ticketed, and then they came to African communities together for help. And the tickets were, the minimum amount was $500 for failing to have their license. And most of the time, these people just come unnoticed. So they will just walk into the salons and they don't ask whether the salon owners, because one of the salon owner who got the ticket wasn't there. And she had her license, but the license was expired. And she tried many times to go to the office downtown to renew it, but was told that now they don't do renewal on site. Renewal have to be done online. And not knowing how to access a computer and doing the application online, so she wasn't able to until she got a fine, and so she came to the office and we tried to solve that issue. But enforcement do happen, and they are done by the Department of State. So the other question is, how is this policy change going to be pushed forward and made a reality? So in one of the recommendations, we want the braiders to unite into some sort of an organization where they will advocate for themselves. And so right now there is no such organization, but ACT through when we did the project, that's one of the recommendations that we asked to be done, because we saw that it is going to be of benefit to the braiders, and it's going to be of benefit to the community as well. And the question about how the policy change is going to be pushed forward and made a reality. So we are advocating at the Department of State. So that's the reason why we conducted the survey and also wrote this report. So we are going to send this report to the Department of State along with the braider testimony, so they know that the braiders are facing an issue in accessing the license. And then these are the recommendations that we are proposing them in order to make access to the licensing easier.
We plan to engage with our city and particularly state elected officials and the administrative agencies. We don't know yet whether these changes would be made administratively or would be made through legislation. Some of the recommendations, like the appointment of a braider to the natural hairstyling, to the aesthetic oversight board, would be administrative changes. Some of them, I think most of these things could be accomplished legislatively, but obviously, if we're not able to make change on that level, we'd be willing to look at legislation. So this is kind of a public launch of advocacy around this set of issues. Aaron, I see that there's a question specifically about the oversight board. How long has this been vacant? How long has there been a lack of representation from African hair braiders on the oversight board?
The appearance enhancement advisory committee is the board that's supposed to advise the Secretary of State on all things related to this license. And so it's really the like professional body that braiders should have to go to. And there's a series of seats that are designated for certain types of position titles. And there's 2 that are supposed to be for natural hairstylists, and they have been vacant since we first started doing initial background research when we were like first discussing this project, which was several years ago at this point. And we've checked periodically, and to my knowledge, they've never been filled. So I'm happy to, if you want to send me an email, I can send you the person who has the question, the link to the page. It's also a citation in the report, but it's been, I think we can say with confidence, at least a couple of years.
And there's another question that asks whether there is going to be a computer literacy component to any of the programs that we.
There's 2 things that it's worth separating here. One is the programs that are required, the training programs that are required to get the natural hairstyling license. And our view is that those requirements should be made as simple and also as relevant as possible. So, you know, we're really trying to refocus those training programs on, you know, health and safety first and foremost, and then on, you know, professionalism and the skills of the craft, and to have a separation between experienced braiders and neophyte braiders. So for that, I think that we wouldn't expect that there would necessarily be a requirement of computer use. But at the same time, I think that there's also, you know, part of this discussion, and I believe in our recommendations, we talk about the needs for just broader supports for this group of working women. And I think that general literacy, like and English language, ESOL, and literacy programs targeted specifically to these workers, the ones who are able to participate in those and want to participate in those, we think that that's an important resource. And we could, you know, I could imagine computer skills and literacy being added to those programs. But we do think that the barrier should be diminished to obtaining the professional, the natural hairstyling license.
All right, so as you see on the screen, these are our contact information. So if you have any questions pertaining to this project, to this report, please feel free to reach us.
So thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please contact us. We are ready to speak with and join with everybody who's ready to push with us.